Good evening. Thank you for joining us. The Indian Jewish Heritage Center. Hi, everyone. The Indian Jewish Heritage Center, together with the Kochini Jewish Heritage Center in Nevatim, are happy to host today Ruth Greenfield, that will tell us about her father and my uncle, the famous Bnei Israel chief architect, Mr. Joshua Benjamin Brunker. Before we start, let me give you a few operational instructions. All the mics are muted to prevent distractions. Please use the chat to send messages and write your questions. Ruth will answer the questions in the end of her talk. If you wish to talk, please write to me in the personal chat, and I will unmute you when the time comes. If you wish to get informed of all our talks or be part of the Heritage Organization, send me a message in the chat with your email address or mobile phone number, and we will keep you informed of our activities. For today's talk, we are very happy to host Ruth Greenfield. Ruth was born in New Delhi. She excelled in her studies. She went into the field of computer programming and analysis. She worked for companies like AT&T and PSE&G in the United States, and currently is working for a credit card company in Israel. Ruth also volunteers for the betterment of the community. She volunteered in Mobile Crash and the Federation of the Mentally Retarded in Delhi, volunteered in Ort and Hadassah, America, and now in Hadassah, Israel, and with the guidance of her mother, Dinah, she became the co-founder of the Indian Jewish Heritage Center and is always pursuing for preservation of her rich Indian Jewish heritage and her father's vision of working with all the communities together in love, compassion, peace, and harmony. Ruth is the mother of Jennifer, Ari, and Atara, and has 4 grandchildren. She lives in Hod HaSharon in Israel and is very much loved by everyone that knows her. So let's relax, enjoy, and have an interesting talk. Ruth, the stage is yours.
Good evening, friends. I would like to thank my family and my friends and Avner for all the help with the lecture. I appreciate your keen interest in this lecture, which has taken many months of research. Folks, you're simply the best. Thank you.
Ruth, please talk louder. We got a message that people can hardly hear you. So
who is this man? Mi achish chefetz chaim ohev yamim lirot tov. Who is the man who desires life and loves days to see good in them? Guard your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking deception. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Shuli Natan, the singer of Jerusalem of Gold, at the 1-month death anniversary of my father, sang this song. My father was born on June 8th, 1919, in Lonavla, Maharashtra, near Bombay. He was the 6th child of a large family of 8 boys and 3 girls. Many times my father said they had enough people in the family to make a cricket team. Finances were tight, but the brothers helped each other financially as well as with the education. My father, even after he got married, he gave a large part of his salary for the siblings and for their welfare and education. Some people even say 50% of his salary was given. Here you see him on the left-hand side, standing with all his family. My father married my mother, Dinah, daughter of Elisheva and Solomon Garapkar, on March 6, 1949. My father loved to take photographs, so you will see a lot of photographs of my parents and very few of them with my father in it. After finishing his studies, my father married my mother, who had arrived from Karachi. My mother was born in Karachi, but during the partition, she moved to Pune. She came via Bombay because there were a lot of riots, but fortunately my grandfather was in the Merchant Navy. So he was able to get the family out without trauma, unlike the other millions who were raped, killed, traumatized in the passage to India. The family moved to Bombay, and after they settled in Pune for a short time, my mother's family made Aliyah to Israel. My mother was not only my father's best friend, but she was his most ardent supporter. But he too supported her in her way of life, because she was very big into volunteering. My parents practically met under the kuppah. The earlier meeting that they had was with a lot of family around, my father's family, my mother's family, so they hardly got a chance to speak. But their marriage was arranged in heaven, and it was very suited. They were suited to each other because they were very similar in their ways, and they were able to balance each other. After the wedding, they moved to Delhi to a place called Pataudi House. Pataudi House was the quarters for the British officers who had left India. They got a small place with a private bathroom. A private bathroom, it's a very rare thing to have when you've got a young couple. And the food was served in the canteen by the chefs. Not only cooks who were cooking there, they were the chefs who used to cook for the British Army. I have one sister, Rosalind, and a brother, Sion, and a brother, Solly. And this is a photograph, an old photograph of my whole family. Rosalind was born in 1950 in Bombay, but the rest of us were born in Delhi. These are my grandchildren, and Sion and Rosalind and Solly's. We don't have all the grandkids in here, but the children are here, but the grandkids of my parents. My parents were very, very social. They had friends from the synagogue. They had friends from work, from the neighbors. The neighbors were their friends. And our house was like a typical Indian train station. A train station where there were constantly guests coming and visiting and even staying over. Many a time, they didn't even give us prior notice. Actually, there was hardly a period when it was just the 6 of us at home. But my parents loved being with the family, loved being with friends. So we always had people coming over. Many a time, even passing tourists visiting the prayer hall would be invited home for a simple Friday night dinner. And of course, at the spur of a moment. My father, he studied Hebrew at the Eli Kaduri school. And when he moved to Delhi, it had a very small Jewish population. It still actually has a very small Jewish population. And my father studied with Mr. Ezekiel Gadkar, who came from Pune. We would bring Mr. Ezekiel Gadkar to come and say the prayers for the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But he was the one who taught my father to say all the prayers so that my father could later conduct all the services at the synagogue. The Jewish community in Delhi was a vibrant, close-knit community. There were Jewish people from all the different communities. We had people from the Bnei Israel community, the Baghdadi community, the Kochini community, and even in the late 70s, we got a lot of Jews who came from the Bnei Menashe community. But most of the time, we were just 5 or 6 Jewish families in Delhi. And usually on Shabbat, there was no minyan. On high holidays, the neighboring towns, that is where the guests would come in. And of course, all the guests would come in, they would come and stay where? At our place. We had people who were the tourists who were coming in through Delhi. We had the people from the embassies. And most of the time, as I said, they were invited home for a nice dinner. My father's famous verse was, spiritual growth can only happen if one has concern towards the welfare of the community. That is why Daddy was always helping people. He taught us to respect everyone. He taught us to respect everyone equally, from the peon who used to come to deliver the papers to the ministers and the CEOs of companies who used to visit us. Each of them got cold water, maybe a few samosas or jalebis, and were always welcome to our house. Of course, my father, for all drawings and as an architect, any work that he did for non-profit organizations or for churches or places of worship, he would always do it pro bono. That means he didn't charge. He never boasted of his life. He never put his title. He never said he was chief architect of the government of India. But he always said he was Joshua Benjamin. He never framed any certificates or displayed any prizes or rewards. In school, Daddy always excelled in his class. He graduated from the JJ School of Architecture, Bombay. Actually, Daddy had wanted to become a train guard, just like his father. But a friend of his noticed that he was a very good artist and asked him to sign up for architecture. But he went and he signed up and he was admitted. He was admitted to the JJ School of Architecture. Later on, he got a UN fellowship on housing and town planning in Switzerland when my sister was just a year old. When she was much older and when we were much older, he was able to go and study at the Technology College in the UK. He had a title. Daddy was Joshua Benjamin, Friba, Fiia, AIIA, which meant Fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects, Fellow of the Indian Institute of Architects, and Associate of the Indian Institute of Architects. After retirement in the government as the chief architect, he became the secretary of the Urban Arts Commission, overlooking development of cities. This was a very high position, and he was a very powerful man, but you did not see that in him. He was very modest, but he was a strong person, and he was very straight. He was very strong with his ethics. He was also the jury member for architectural cases and competitions. He was vice chairman of the Indian Institute of Architects, New Delhi, member of the Faculty of Technology in the University of Delhi. And when Daddy used to be at the university, he loved his students and he was very kind and compassionate. So the students had a nickname for him. They called him Daddy Cool. If you all remember the song from the 70s, Daddy, Daddy Cool. So whenever any of his students passed us in the street or in the schools, they would look at us and they said, Joshua Benjamin's children, Daddy, Daddy Cool. Here are all the certificates which were all rolled away in the cupboards, which we had not even looked at because Daddy never showed his certificates. They were never on the walls. They were never framed up. The certificates were hidden away from our eyes. And I'm so glad that now I'm doing this project because these certificates were brought to Israel by my mother. And because of this project, I'm finally getting to see them. I have a long list of buildings of the ones that my father designed, but I will start with the feather in his hat, the Parliament Building Annex, an impressive, sprawling, white, modern building, beautiful interior, classy furniture, which was also designed by my father, antique sculptures in the lobby, which were again chosen by him. He would go and handpick the sculptures for the lobby. But the government projects were always done on a tight budget. But Daddy had to find a way to make the building beautiful and at a minimum cost. See, he used jalis, meaning Indian screens, made out of concrete slabs in various designs and molds to give the special effects and ventilation. The Parliament Building Parliament Building had to be completed before the conference in 1975. And I will tell you a short story about the conference. It was the day before the conference. I'm talking the night before. My father realized that there was no logo on the wall of the conference hall. If you look at the lower right picture, if you see in the distance, there's a logo there. There was no logo, and the conference was the next day. So my father, what do? You can't find a carpenter at the last minute. So he grabbed a piece of paper, drew out a logo. Now what do? What do you hang it on? You're talking about a large piece. So he took an old maroon carpet that was there, put the cardboard pieces on it, and took it, and that is what hung on the wall of the conference center. Yes, with all the dignitaries from all over the world, this is what was hanging on the wall of the Parliament building. It was only later that they brought it down and they made a makeshift logo into a permanent logo. Unfortunately, the Parliament building does not look like this anymore. The exterior has been changed, and the beautiful lobby that you see here with the water body, with the plants, have been replaced by little rooms. Unfortunately, this is a problem that is in India. A lot of buildings have been destroyed and the structure is totally changed. Here you see a photograph of my father standing next to Indira Gandhi at the Parliament building at the inauguration. However, he really didn't want to stand there. He had disappeared and everyone had to go looking for him because Indira Gandhi wanted him to stand next to her, because he says she wanted the architect who had designed this beautiful building to stand next to her. So Daddy was found, and there he was. The photograph was taken. The Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. This is a majestic building. Look at the photograph that's on the left at the bottom. Do you see any stars of David? Let me make it easier for you. This is the sketch drawn by my father. You have to remember that this was the time there were no computers. All the drawings for the buildings were not computer generated. They were done by hand. So look at the stars. Try and find the stars of David that are there. They're on the ceilings, they're on the wall, they're on the floor. And that is the sign that that was a Jewish architect. If you remember, I said my father was a modest person. He never put his name on any of the buildings, but the sign was there that it was a Jewish architect. Religious and non-profit organizations, always. My father never charged. The work was pro bono. Even the church in Delhi, when he went to design it, of course, he was generous and didn't charge anything. So the congregation at the church requested my father to come and join them for services. My father says, I'm Jewish. They were shocked. Here is a watercolor by Professor J. Voronkar, which he had presented to my father in the 80s. Professor Voronkar had traveled to India on a regular basis and had studied Indian synagogues for decades. We now have at the Heritage Center in Nevatim copies of all his beautiful watercolors. We had a few exhibitions of his watercolors and for everyone to enjoy. We saw a lot of buildings. We went with my father to the building sites. We were climbing over bamboo scaffolding. We were looking at his blueprints, checking out the design. But there was one place my father never took us. It was this building, the Defense Headquarters of India. And this was the only time my father never brought home the designs to the house. They were left in the office. We never knew what the inside looked and the design of the inside. So we have only these photographs where you see my father standing on the steps of the building. My father also designed a lot of courthouses. The one on the left was one of his earlier designs of a district court in 1955. And later on, he did a lot of different courts, which are district courts and high courts in Delhi and in other parts of India. If you notice that the buildings, none of them had a glass exterior. As you know, there are a lot of buildings with very nice glass exteriors, but these kind of buildings need round-the-clock air conditioning. And that was not right for the stifling heat of Delhi. So Daddy always checked what the building was and what the conditions were. So all his designs were tastefully made, but they were energy efficient and always suited the surroundings. Here you have the buildings of the IIT, the Indian Institute of Technology. This is the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay, but he also designed the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. IIT colleges are rated the highest universities of India. But you will ask, what are the buildings he loved designing the most? Believe it or not, it was the high density housing for slum dwellers. Despite India's achievements in different fields over the last decade in India, India has not yet tackled one of its basic needs, and that is housing for its teeming millions. He voiced his opinions about the crisis in housing for the deprived and underprivileged. He would write to ministers. He would write to the newspapers. My father was constantly asking for solutions to help and assist the downtrodden. So many papers and folders and letters I have in my cabinets, newspaper cuttings of his correspondence, all of them trying to get help for people who did not have a voice of their own in society. He was constantly finding ways to build houses to raise the standards of the living of these people, the constant struggle to build affordable housing for the India's urban poor. We will talk about his awards later. At this point, I would like to mention one thing. All the money he won from his prizes and awards, it was a lot of money, he would use to buy land or pay for housing for the slum dwellers. And here you can see there's a newspaper article of how his persistence worked. Here you can see some articles in the newspaper where my father spoke about the environment. You're talking a long time back where people didn't speak about the environment, but my father was always planning environmentally friendly buildings. He always spoke about saving trees and structures that were environmentally friendly, voicing his opinion that the importance of trees and greenery. He was always worried that a city would become a concrete jungle. Daddy was all the time checking. Daddy was a modest man, but also a very powerful man. Because he was in the Urban Arts Commission, he was at a very high level. But he had very, very high standards of ethics. He never took bribes, and he was a very, very strong person. But when you met him, he was a modest person. Here you can see his modest house that he built in Delhi after he retired. It was on a shoestring budget, but it was a beautiful, stylish house, and of course, open to all the guests who used to visit on a regular basis. My sister Rosalind, Sain, and myself made Aliyah, but my brother Solomon stayed back in Delhi. At one point, he moved to Bangalore in the south, and my father had retired. So my parents sold their house and moved to the south with my brother. But a true architect never retires. He continued his efforts. He continued his drawings of designs of buildings, and of course, raising the standards of the slum dwellers. He would go to the government, speak to them, send them letters, have meetings with ministers, or to get them to pay attention to the plight of the slum dwellers and the poor. My father continued to design buildings. After the 9/11 catastrophe, he designed a spiritual center for all religions to gather and promote peace and nonviolence. Look at this building and look at the design that it has. From one angle, it looks like a Hindu temple. From another angle, it looks like a Gurudwara. And I'm sure all of you are asking, what about the Jewish side? Well, all the columns, if you notice, meet up at the top, and at the top, it formed a Star of David. I promised you a list of my father's buildings. My mother made this list after my father passed away because we had not kept track. We had not kept track of the list of buildings. So unfortunately, this is a partial list. This is a list of the buildings that he designed. I haven't put down the houses that he designed privately for people and friends. Here you have more buildings and some more buildings and some more buildings, lots of buildings. I will pause here. I will pause here to show the buildings that were designed in countries that were not in India. This is where I paused about the buildings that my father designed overseas. Again, it's a partial list. That my father used to travel a lot overseas, so we knew he went to design buildings. He went to Mauritius, he went to Kabul in Afghanistan, he went to Europe, mostly to design embassies or consulates. This is one of the designs. We know that it was done by Daddy, my father. This is the India House in Paris, France. And there was the Gandhi Institute in Mauritius. We still need to look at the photographs. The Indian Embassy in Karachi, Pakistan, which was unfortunately bombed. The exhibition building in Kabul. In Zambia, there was an Indian embassy. Singapore embassy, we are not sure, but he had traveled there. And then we have the Embassy of India in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Unfortunately, my father didn't make a list and we never kept track. So we are still in the process of finding all the buildings that he designed. I'm going to talk about the butterfly effect, which is the lives of people that Daddy touched. The moment my father started working, I mentioned this before, that he gave close to 50% of his salary to others for living expenses and education. This continued for the rest of his life. My mother used to complain because it used to be hard on everyone. We as kids never felt the lack of money. But this is how Daddy was. He was generous and he was always caring about everyone. In his possession, my father had a map. We have no idea where he got it from, but it was the map of Garcia de Ortia's mansion and a herbal garden. It showed the street, Jew Street in Goa. On basis of this map, they have now made what you see the photograph at the bottom, the garden, which is the Garcia de Orta Medicinal Garden in Goa. And we will one day have a garden with the name of Garcia de Orta in Nevatim, in our Heritage Center, Nevatim. I will also mention now the next fact is about the discovery of the Bnei Menashe. My father had gone in the early 70s to Manipur and Mizoram on a work project, and someone told him that there were Jews there. He straight away paid the pilot the money for the gas and asked him to take him where the Jews were. This was the first time the Jews, the so-called Jews of Manipur and Mizoram, met a Jew from outside. My father started to spread this information, and it was later that Rabbi Avichai and historian Hillel Hankin did more research, and now you have a whole lot of Bnei Menashe making Aliyah. But this was my father. He was always sharing information to everyone who came to our house. He was talking about the research he did, and many of them have continued to do research. It planted a seed of rich heritage, which we are reaping the benefits now. People like Dr. Shalva Weil, Dr. Joan Rowland, Mrs. Shirley Eisenberg, who have all written a lot about our history. My father also did research about the Jews and people who were saved during World War II, who were fleeing from Poland and who came to India to the Balachari camp. The Jam Sahib of Balachari saved all these people. This is a whole story by itself. But my father had done a lot of research, and he was the first one who had contacted the son of the Jam Sahib to get this information. We had contacted Ken Robbins, and we had a function through the Heritage Center about the Jews who were saved. And we found 2 survivors here in Israel, one in Petah Tikva and one in Afula. I was sad that my father didn't meet them, but I was happy that at least my mother got a chance to meet them. I'll go to the next thing about my father's arbitration cases, because he was also a judge. He always took only a basic fee. He never charged more than the basic fee. And sometimes transportation and accommodation if the case was not in the same place, like if he was in Delhi. He was always connecting people to start them off with businesses. There was one thing with my father. He was a powerful man, modest but powerful. But somehow, whenever he requested for land, he got it. He asked, we were all praying, not we, before I was born, in a prayer hall. And my father asked for land for the prayer hall, and he got it right next to the golf links, right next to the embassies, in the middle, where you have the Delhi synagogue, Delhi prayer hall now. He requested for land for the cemetery, and he received the land right next to the prayer hall. He requested for land for the extension of the prayer hall, and he got it right next to the prayer hall. And later on, when my mother was working in mobile creches, where she was volunteering, they were working in a rented place. So my father said, I'm going to request for land for the mobile creches. He requested, and where did he get the land? right in the middle of Connaught Place. My father was very much into collecting the history of the Indian Jews. This is something which was close to his heart. In the early 80s, he got me to make a documentary movie on the Bnei Israel. I was only 18 and I was not interested in the history, but he said I had to start preserving the heritage. So we all went for a tour. We went to Navgaon, and that's when he saw that the Navgaon cemetery had no wall. So he collected money, which was of course not enough. So he put a lot of money of his own and he built this monument and the partial wall that was there around the cemetery. He had given enough funds, but the funds got used up and only the partial wall was built. My mother, before she passed away, gave another $1,000 to complete the wall. And it is still in an account in Bombay. And I hope one day the community in Bombay will use that to complete the wall. Here you see the monument which was made. And on all sides of it, they have carvings which talks about the history of the Indian Jews, the Bnei Israel Jews. My father traveled to a lot of places to design all the buildings. And wherever he found out about anything to do with Indian Jews or the lost tribes, he would research it. So he made a book, he wrote a book, which was called The Lost Tribes and the Legend of Jesus in India. He did a lot of this research from his own money. And he also wrote a book about the Jews of Cochin because it was very important to him to preserve the heritage. And a little book on garlic and its health benefits, because my father was very much into natural medicines. But whenever someone asked for the book, he would present it to them. And if someone asked to pay for the book, he would ask them to donate to a worthy cause that they found. He would never accept money for the books. Here's an article in the newspaper about the book. My father, when he was in Bombay, got a prize, which was the Chairman Award for the Best Architect in India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal. Here's a certificate that he got also from the American Joint Distribution Committee. There were a lot of these awards, which unfortunately we did not know. The few that we know, I'm showing you about. I'm showing you these awards. And the articles that we also found, I'm showing, but I have no idea how many more awards he had. The additional awards and prizes were from the Central Public Works Department for the Architect of the Century Award. He also got an award for the Best Architect. And you can see here a design of a Calcutta museum, which he won first prize. But this museum was not built in the end because they lacked the funds. Here you will also see that he got the first prize for the Gandhi Bhavan competition. The government entrusted it to a local architect against the rules. This was a time where my father had mentioned that all the architects had come with the designs and it was supposed to be in closed envelopes. And they opened up the envelopes and the architects who had given all the designs walked out. But this is life. This is a painting of my father's that's hanging in my bedroom. And a lot of these paintings, I just have to tell you, were made on scrap paper. He would take any piece of paper that he would get and start painting or drawing. There was a time that once I was taking an exam in school and I turned my page and there was this huge sketch of my father's of a building. Now try and explain to your teacher that that's not your sketch. It's your father that was drawing in your book. But that was Daddy. He was always drawing and he was always singing. And that's why actually I forgot to mention that he was always whistling and singing. And all his colleagues in his office who were not Jews knew all the tunes of the prayers because Daddy was always singing. He would draw and he would sing. Questions I regret never asking my father. We always regret things. I request all of you to sit down with your parents and ask them questions. Ask them about their life. Shimon Peres, when he was foreign minister, visited India. And he was supposed to have a 5-minute visit to the Delhi prayer hall. However, it became a half an hour visit because he wanted to sit and taste the food. He wanted to eat matar paneer. And he wanted to sit down with my father and Mr. Ezekiel Malekar. He asked my father for a private meeting. What he discussed on that private meeting with my father on the 18th of May, 1993, I will never know. Also, Moshe Dayan had made a secret visit to Delhi in 1977. I know that my mother and my sister met Ruth Dayan, but did the others also meet? Did my father meet Moshe Dayan? I don't know. Also, as I remember, the map that my father had got of the Garza de Orta mansion, where did he get that map? We have no idea. My father left a very full, active life. In June 2005, he had a stroke, which left him paralyzed on the right side. But that did not stop him from his activities. He still got letters written. He would get a woman who would sit next to him, write out the letters, print them out, and send them to the local governments and the ministers, demanding changes for the underprivileged. I will never forget the last words he said to me. He said to me, "There is still so much to do that I have not yet accomplished. There is so much poverty and corruption. The poor and the needy require housing and assistance, and no one is there to support them. I did not do enough to uplift the lives of the unprivileged, of the underprivileged in our country." He is buried in Bangalore, in the cemetery in Bangalore, with the saying, what he always loved was, "Be good and do good is the essence of all religions." Thank you. It's the music of Shulnatan.
The link between our people goes back to thousands of years when the first Jews landed on India's southwestern coastline. Since then, the Jews have flourished and the traditions and practices thrived in India. We are proud of Jewish sons and daughters of India like Lieutenant General J.F.R. Jacob, Vice Admiral Benjamin Simpson, Master Architect Joshua Benjamin, and film actors Nadia, Sulochana, Pamela, whose diverse contributions have greatly enriched the fabric of Indian society.
Thank you very much to everyone.
Okay. Wonderful. Solly, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you all very much for inviting me over here. And it's really a pleasure to see you all and some very old friends like Danny Benjamin there. I mean, after like ages. And I won't take too much of your time because it'll be nice to have a discussion. I think the 4 points I want to kind of add to what Ruthie is saying, Ruthie has explained so extensively, is to emphasize our dad's involvement with a lot of range of social and environmental issues. So he is also part of a group of architects who were considered part of the Indian modernist, inspired very much like the Bauhaus movement. My father, for example, was very much inspired in his architecture by Walter Gropius, who was certainly considered as one of the main people in the Bauhaus movement. And the person whom he worked with in the 40s and 50s was Otto Königsberger, a German Jew who had moved to India and is credited with some of the most important environmentally sustainable works at a time when people weren't talking about these things. He wrote a book called Tropical Architecture, which is considered almost like a manual, not just in India, but most of the South, right from Africa to Southeast Asia, South Asia. And Daddy has a particular design of a courtyard house, which is published in Otto Konigsberger's book. He was deeply involved with a lot of environment and ecological movements. So what we have today is a coastal regulatory zone, which is one of the most important regulatory zones, which restricts buildings close to the coast within 100 meters and right up to 200 meters. So Daddy is one of the people who pushed for this in the 70s when he was doing the Navgaon Memorial. He saw that in the distant, there was the Thal Varshish huge fertilizer factory coming up. And he used his connections in the bureaucracy to push for an environmental regulation, which close to about 10 years later, because that's the time it takes once you start working the system, which then became known as the CRZ. Another area was the Delhi Ridge, similar kind of regulations which were built, including then in Agra, the Taj Mahal, where there was supposed to be a flyover and a mall across the river. And he again pushed the system to stop some of those developments because it would stop the natural beauty. And today what we also know is the kind of environmental pollution that would happen because of those developments. The same thing happened in Delhi with the Yamuna riverfront. I was also myself involved with the environmental organization, and he had as much energy as most of us who were very young. And he said, if you guys don't get your act together, I'm going to independently publish reports and get them pushed. So there was a lot of kind of energy he had. And one could see that in a lot of his own, he was the secretary of the Delhi Urban Arts Commission, which was a major regulatory body in the capital, especially for the central capital area. And many of his political stances went against the powers that be, especially to restrict very large developers to, push in very high-rise stuff, which would actually, reduce the kind of heritage value of those areas. I'd like to just end with two more kind of contributions he made to the artist community and to the theater community, where he helped out people who were to start an artist village in a central part of Delhi. As Ruti was saying, he was instrumental in getting land for people in good locations, which is a very, very tough, and I'm sure in Israel too, that's quite a complicated process. So the Gari village was one such, and then also Gurcharan Singh, who had a pottery, which became one of the major centers for pottery in India and South Asia. My parents had a hand in that. And finally in mobile creche, as Ruti had mentioned. So I'll stop here and really just want to thank you all and for giving this opportunity to really emphasize the kind of role he had in India's environmental history. And again, as we said, we don't have many records of many of these things. We have, a piece of paper here and there. And I hope at some point we can start to trace this out to also show the wider kind of contribution of the Jewish community in India. And because that's not talked about too much. And I think this is a very good opportunity and a very good start as what you all have organized. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Oli. It's nice to see you. Roslyn, please unmute yourself. Just a second, guys. Roslyn will unmute herself.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
According to what I see, Ruthie and Solomon, my brother and sister, have talked and shown aspects of Dad and his achievements, his life education and artistic gifts. And Solly has talked about the building and environmental laws, which my father could and did implement during his career. And I am going to show in the limited time frame given to me about the spiritual and compassionate side of my father as a simple human being. It's a very simple, it's the side that is not always shown on the buildings, but just to give you a few examples, he insisted that the Delhi prayer hall remain as a prayer hall and not be a synagogue, so that families and father, mothers, children, friends could all pray together in the same space. He also had his own views about kashrut, which were really, I think, logical. According to him, he always said by not cooking the baby goat or whatever in the mother's milk, it wanted to show it wanted to show how to be human, or rather, not be animals, and be more sensitive to the killing of animals. And I also I recollect how someone stole, during the winter months, the quilts, bed sheets, blankets from one of the windows through the bars And of course, my mom was quite mad and angry, but Dad, with his usual philosophy, put everything in proper perspective by saying that the person's needs were greater than ours. He ended by saying, well, we have too many blankets and bed sheets anyway. His patience was incredible, as his lack of temper. Never in my whole life did I ever see him angry. And I remember I learned, what I have learned from him is to show compassion and to help people when in need. While working in his office in Nirman Vihar, he used to have a young boy, not married, supporting a mother and an unmarried sister, not Jewish. Now, this boy, for various reasons, went into a sort of depression and could not do any work in the office. And his partner wanted to fire him, but my father insisted on giving him his salary for about 2 years plus treatment, and brought him back to himself by talking and helping him. Another instance was when I commented why they could not modernize methods of building in India, typical Israeli. And my dad wisely answered, yes, but then all those men and women would be out of work and starve. How true. Sometimes in Western countries, we tend to modernize things, but forget the misery caused to people out of work. And of course, I used to study in a school which was close next to his office in Nirman Vihar in India Gate. And after school, I would visit him and see how he talked to everyone. He always spoke for the poor man and would speak and would sarcastically tell all the smug officials, which are really high, about the treatment of the lower Indian caste, scheduled classes, and building labor, building with marble floors when they are poor with no shoes, clothes, or food. In fact, one of his statements was, India is built on the tears of the poor. To quote him, the homeless, lowest rung of society, the builders of India, both men and women, sit on the marble floors of building projects. Well, I can still go on. I don't know if I have enough time, but that Abner will have to tell me. And there was also an instance during Diwali when we had, the usual contractors used to come and try to bribe my dad. And they had gone out, and I was at home, and my parents, were not there. And this contractor got a bowl of fruit and halwa as a present. I took it thinking it was just fruit and sweets. Anyway, my parents came back, and Dad sent the bowl back, just keeping the contents. Later, I realized the bowl was made out of solid silver. And this is something that he never accepted any bribes. And there's another instance about how Ruthie used to get angry when there was a servant woman who in Delhi used to come and work with my mother. And she would walk into the house and admire herself in the mirror each day for at least half an hour before starting work. And Ruthie sort of got angry, but then Dad reminded Ruthie that, this servant woman, she lived under the bridge in a hut, which most probably didn't have electricity, flowing water, or even a basic thing like a mirror. So that shows the real human side of my father, in spite of being so. Well, I can go on, Abner, shall I? I don't know, we have enough time?
Rosalind, as long as it's interesting, you can go on.
Ah, really? Okay.
People are laughing and enjoying, so go ahead.
Okay, I always had this argument with him, when as a teenager, I always wanted clothes and shoes, and I could never win anything because then he would take me aside, usually for half an hour, and give me a big lecture about the philosophy of knowing that there are millions of people without clothes, shoes, and food, and no arguments after such a convincing talk. So just to show how he was with, and he was always, I can't imagine how someone can be so patient, which I have never seen. I don't think I've seen it with anybody else. I'll give you a very interesting example of, I used to work in a lab in school with all the acids and all that, as usual. And of course, I used to like to borrow his handkerchiefs, which are the men's size handkerchiefs, which was very convenient. And he said, instead of getting angry at me, he said, Rosalind, I had an important meeting today with the Minister of Housing and in the middle, I wanted to blow my nose. The handkerchief I opened out in front of everyone had holes in it. And I think the message got through and to stop me from using his handkerchiefs. So I think that's about it. I won't go more. I'll let San give his the fun stuff with Dad. And
okay, San, it's your turn. Unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening. I hope all of you hear me. Why you run away?
No, I can see you better.
Okay. If I have to talk of my dad, I would describe him as a jack of all trades and master of many. It was absolutely fantastic to see what this person was able to do at the spur of a moment. I remember very well that once I tell my parents that, oh, tomorrow I need a white pair of trousers, long trousers, because we have a march past in the school. Well, Dad didn't think twice. He pulled off a white bed sheet off the bed, put it on our dining table, folded it up in two, and then he starts measuring me, puts it down on the cloth, gets out his 3B pencil, I think, and starts drawing. And he had drawn the whole pattern directly onto was a bed sheet, takes off my mom's scissors. Now, when he used to cut paper, he didn't cut paper. He used to rip through it because that's what architects usually do. And now you can see the horror on my mom's face when her dear husband takes her scissors and rips through all the cuttings the way he wants it. And an hour later, my trousers were ready. And the next day, young Mr. Benjamin was marching with Delhi's best. It was in all kind of ways that, he could surprise you. One of the most fantastic things that he used to make with us, I think Solly and myself, was he used to make kites. But his kites were not conventional kites. He used to take these sticks from the old kites that he used to have, always torn kites. He used to have his tracing paper, and he used to put them over there, fold it up, and he used to cut it in the form of a cobra snake with a long tail. Now, that doesn't end with everything. You need to glue up a kite. So he used to take rice, boil it. We had this tree in the garden. I forget, it was like a berry tree, and he used to boil them and make the glue. So we had homemade kites made by homemade glue. Thank God I had the good kite string for that. So we used to go out with this kite that had a fantastic shape, and everyone's looking at this kite, and it is so special, and it's up in the air. And these were crazy times. God help us if Dad ever thought of joining us in one of our cricket games or in our football games, because then we used to have these super fast balls being thrown at us. And of course, if anyone knows what a cricket ball is, it's like a stone coming up at you. And if he was batting, the ball used to go all over. And of course, it had to go into one of those neighbors' houses, not into the house, usually into the drawing room, through the window. So all of a sudden, we have this neighbor screaming around and shouting until she sees the culprit is Mr. Benjamin himself. So everything used to calm down. And she used to come, and, we are apologizing as little kids, and Mr. Benjamin is standing there like another big kid. And she used to come and return the ball and say, okay, everything's okay, no problem. They were crazy times. He just loved having time with us. India is also a very special place that, has so many festivals, and everything is happening, and there are temples and gurdwaras and everything to visit. And we had a great time during all these festivals, and, going to places like, Birla Mandir or Hanuman Mandir. It's in Delhi, but it was so exciting to see all the action going around in all of these temples. I think one of the things that my dad gave to me is that, to appreciate a lot of the things that you see today on our walls. And because, without this, there was no fun. Especially festivals like Holi and Diwali, it was crazy time for us. Especially we were living in a very closed colony that everyone knew everybody. So everyone had to go and have fun with each other. Rosalind talked about him visiting his office, and I used to go to his office, and all of us used to go to his office very often. It was fantastic to see the way everyone was treated there, and the atmosphere of the office over there. There was no tension of having the big boss walk in all of a sudden. The only thing that I noticed, and that was in the first time I came back from Israel and visited his office with him, was that when I came in, everybody stood, and I didn't understand it. I didn't catch it. And then they sat down. But everything was quiet. Everything was, very cool and collected over there, down to business, and everyone has a talk to say. I think he learned from Judaism that the smallest judge, the most junior judge, has to talk first, and then the senior judge can make his judgment. So it was a very different kind of office that he had over there. Dad, of course, toured all over the world. And every tour of his was an adventure. He used to tell us about the shooks and the shopping areas of Afghanistan. He told us about the wilder areas of Turkey. He told us about what happened to him when he was in Switzerland, that he nearly got lost because he started walking on the snow in a direction looking for a building that was under the snow. It was always an adventure. He went to Mauritius, and over there on the last day that he was supposed to come back to India, and there was only one flight a week, he got attacked by a stingray. So Mr. Benjamin got attacked a few times across his chest and over his hands. And luckily his assistant was on the beach, on the sandy side of the beach, and he pulled him out and he had to be taken to hospital. Now that wasn't enough. Mr. Benjamin is in hospital, he cannot fly, and he tells his assistant to go back to Delhi and not to tell anything to his family. So this poor guy comes, and now he has to make up some kind of a cock and a bull story that, Mr. Benjamin is so busy in Mauritius, he cannot come this week. He's only going to come the next week, and he has sent part of his bag with us, so I'm bringing it over here, part of his baggage, and he brought it in. It was only a week later when Dad came back that we saw the marks on his body, and we saw that this guy, he nearly got killed because he was swimming out in the Indian Ocean. Again, that was another adventure. It was always fun with Dad. I think it was also a part of him having such a tough childhood that when we were growing up, it was always, okay, let's go to Connaught Place, let's go to Indian Coffee House to eat dosa, or let's go over to Standard Restaurant to have pastries. In later years, he would ask us, where do you want to go? And, everyone gives, throws the idea of this one going to go to different kind of restaurants. Somehow his car used to go straight to India International Center, to his club, and that is where everyone ended up. They can be shouting and screaming in the car, but Mr. Benjamin's car is automatic, even if he changed the gears. These are the kind of funny things that I experienced with my dad. He got a lot of prizes, but I think the biggest prize that he got was the love that he got from his colleagues, from his peers, from his family, and all the people that he had around him. It is, I think, the biggest prize that any person can ever get when so many people give you so much love. And I think it still goes on. It goes on through all of us. I see the amount of fun that Solly, Ruthie, Rosalind, when we get together, we can be so crazy. We can be so mad together that, even our grandchildren are suddenly wondering, what happened to the old man? He's playing around like a kid anymore. So
great.
There are a lot of things over there that are. Yes.
We have Danny that wants to say a few things, and
Sure.
JR will say a few things. So So
Yes.
thank you. And I'll unmute the Benjamins later on. Have a fun with us.
Bless
So,
you all.
Danny?
And take care.
Danny?
Hi. First of all, it's great to be here, and thanks a lot for sharing. And although I'm also a Benjamin, no relative, but we are almost relatives because we were one of 4 or 5 or 6 families that lived together in New Delhi in those days. So I knew Joshua, or Uncle Joshua as we called him then, very well. And of course, we spent a lot of time in their house, and they spent time in our house. And I recognized my dad in 1 or 2 photographs that Ruthie showed from the early days. One of them sprawled on the grass over there. And so I just wanted to say that I remember Joshua exactly as you guys portrayed him. And thanks a lot for sharing. Those were great times, and let's keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
Great. Now we have another person, someone called JR. So JR, you can unmute yourself.
Can you see me now?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Okay, yes. So greetings to the Benjamin family from Toronto. I am Joshua, and I was named after my beloved uncle, Uncle Joshua. Although I don't have any of his, I have few of his characteristics. There's one little conversation I'd like to mention, and this was in 1994, I think, when I visited India with my ex-wife. We were sitting in the lounge at Mr. Benjamin's house, and I happened to, we were talking, chatting about various things and various topics. And I remember asking him in particular, Uncle Joshua, tell us your secret of your success. And I would like to share this with you all. He said to me that, and that's very, I understand the practical side of what he told me. He said he took on projects in his career that other architects backed out. So he was which is called, he was very competent architect. Now, as you all know, that architecture needs a lot of shapes, and the shapes have to be supported by calculations, and then only you can go ahead with a certain aesthetic shape. So this is the secret that he told me of his career. I'll never forget.
Great.
Great. Thank you all. Greetings.
Thanks.
Shalom.
Thank you all. Guys, it was a wonderful evening and a very interesting one and very emotional one. Talking about my uncle, my dear uncle. So guys, thank you, the Benjamins. It was wonderful. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And see you again next week. Shabbat Shalom, and stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.